Oh, hi there. My name is Scott Cawthon, and I would love to read for you something I wrote over 10 years ago on August 24th, 2015. Now, I want to talk about what won't be included. The box. You know, when I released the first game over a year ago, I was amazed at how quickly everyone found every bit of lore and story. Then, the same happened with Part 2. Fans and YouTubers dug in and found everything. Game Theory did an incredible video on Part 2, getting almost everything right. Then Part 3 came out, and once again, the story was uncovered by the community. It seemed like there was nothing I could hide. But then I released Part 4, and somehow, no one, not a single person, found the pieces. The story remains completely hidden. I guess most people assume I filled the game with random Easter eggs this time. I didn't. What's in the box? It's the pieces put together. But the bigger question is, would the community accept it that way? The fact that the pieces have remained elusive this time strikes me as incredible and special, a fitting conclusion in some ways, and because of that, I've decided that maybe some things are best left forgotten. Forever. Being a FNAF theorist is an interesting experience, isn't it? Over a decade-long history of this series, the way that fans interact with its lore has changed immensely. For the first 3 games, the goal of theorists was largely finding the details that I put into my games, asking questions about those details and putting together the story I was trying to tell. But from FNAF 4 onward, theorizing became more complicated. You had a distinct narrative happening between nights of the game, with the crying child's final week alive. Then there was the original novel trilogy, which gave names to some of the faces that we'd come to know and love or hate. For example, Purple Guy was now William Afton. But of course, those novels are telling a different story from the mainline games. And speaking of games, there are now games that, according to the community, aren't even canon to the games. FNAF World is taken to be canon in some parts and not in other parts. Into the Pit is of dubious and unlikely canonicity, and there are lots of spin-offs and troll games and 3 Freddy in Space games, which simply exist for me to have fun. But how do they inform the lore? Who knows? And now we have the modern era with Steelwool Studios' 5 games, Help Wanted with Curse of Dreadbear, Security Breach, Ruin, Help Wanted 2, and Secret of the Mimic, and whatever else is coming down the line. And those games have given us something very interesting. A built-in narrative and discoverable backstory. Most notably, in my opinion, Secret of the Mimic shows us how it all began. As Arnold, we learn the story of Edwin Murray, Fiona, David, F10N4, and M2 through audio logs, environmental storytelling, and a ghostly robotic child's voice that seems to follow us wherever we go. And from these games, we now have full stories that we can connect to the original game's timeline, which is where the theorists come in. As I, Maury Mortimer now, not Scott Cawthon, said in Part 1 of Chroma Theory, we are now free from the times of PNG offices and cryptic background lore, and now live in the glorious present of Pizzaplexes and cryptic foreground lore. Many details are much more clear and much less abstract than in previous games, but these rich stories live in the same franchise as FNAF 4, and that game in particular is one that is very connected to the modern era. What theorists have been tasked with is dealing with all these disparate pieces, and as a wise man once said, It was difficult to put the pieces together, and I have promised a lot of answers over the last 4 videos of Chroma Key Theory, so let's get to it. Ladies, gentlemen, and of course, all other configurations of being, willkommen, bienvenue, welcome to Chroma Key Theory, Part 3, the final chapter, the Afton and Fiona special. My name is Maury F. Mortimer, and I think it's time to be green again. There we go. The emerald hue hath returned to mine beauteous form. But now the appetizer is over. Now begins the end of Chroma Key Theory. I want to do something I would have been fully incapable of doing during part 1, right here at the start, and that is assigning each color its own individual set of meanings, which is what I will be using for the remainder of this video and referencing back to in any future videos, should the need arise. Red. Agony and consequences. It's very powerful, used to represent strong emotions, characters, or settings of great consequence. And most notably, agony, which adds in an association with blood, is red. The primary characters are Michael Afton, Foxy, Old Man Consequences, Vanny, Circus Baby, and Andrew from Fazbear Frights. Orange. Rage and fire. The veritable spark of life is often shown using orange remnant, as well as the infernos that are often used to burn away the agony of tragedy. Multiple orange-associated characters are shown to be consumed by rage, those primary characters being Edwin Murray, the Mimic, Sun, Movie Charlotte, and David Murray. Yellow. Ecstasy and fear. I specifically chose the word ecstasy in order for it to act as a sort of opposite to agony. The yellow to its red that combines to form orange remnant, which can be assumed to be somewhat of a cohesive whole, if not just a sum of its parts. However, it exists in much simpler forms as joy, hope, and optimism. There also exists its darker counterpart in cowardice, lies, fear, disguise, and deception. The primary characters for yellow being Fiona Murray, William Afton, Vanessa, Golden Freddy, Chica, and Jake from Frights. Green. Love and control. The natural green represents ideas like protection, creation, care, and rot. It is not entirely a good green, but everything that comes from the natural world and human flesh and blood. The unnatural green represents ideas like computers, AI, rigidity, immortality, technology as a whole, and, in some cases, jealousy. There also exists the Vengeful green, which is specifically an Andrew and Montgomery Gator thing, but deserves mentioning here. The primary characters for green are Fiona Murray, M1, Sun, Glitchtrap, and Springtrap. Blue. Despair and madness. Often a sign of tranquility, sadness, and grief, still waters can turn rough in madness's ever-changing tides. And the moon, a primarily blue character, does represent madness in almost every single folklore that the moon symbol is used in. The primary characters for blue are Edwin Murray, Ballora, Michael Afton, Henry Emily, and, of course, Moon. Even though this, to an extent, supports that fucking minion Gajinka from the Character Encyclopedia, I think I'm gonna commit Henry's Silver Eyes. Purple. Vice and shadow. While it is often used as the evil Afton color, purple exists to a lesser extent in all characters who have experienced a form of corruption. Henry, Edwin, Fiona. Purple is often also used as the shadow color, when black would not fit within the graphical style of FNAF's minigames. The primary characters for purple are William Afton, Michael Afton, Shadow Freddy, Edwin Murray, and Fiona Murray. And throw Henry in there, why not? Gray. ghosts and metal. The secondary remnant color of sorts, gray, is basically the color of every ghost and every person associated with ghosts. White ghostly pinprick eyes are described as silver eyes in the book of the same name, though in being the color of metal, it can also be tied to any characters primarily made of metal, those being the Mimic, Ennard, Michael Afton, and every fucking ghost and endoskeleton. Black. Death. It's fairly simple, self-explanatory. The primary characters are Nightmare, Lefty, and RWQXFASXC. White is life. Also, very self-explanatory. The primary characters are... Wait, is that right? No one? Certain versions of Chica, I guess? The Fun Times? Not really. Oh, here it is. Black and white. Life and death. Who'd have thunk it? Though specifically the balance of black versus white can represent life within death, death within life, or a balance of both. The primary characters for that being the Puppet, Nightmarion, and the White Tiger. I also feel it is necessary to define a term before we dig into our Fazbear frozen pizza here. Quintessence. Something that has become a very interesting conversation is the nature of what a soul or remnant actually is. A very common phrase you'll hear in discussions of the matter is, there are no ghosts in FNAF, since whenever spirits are explored in any depth, the word soul seems to be a misnomer. Traditionally, the soul is understood to be the immortal essence of a person that persists after death into whatever afterlife you go to. And this is only marginally important, but Scott Cawthon is a self-described Christian with a history of making Christian content before FNAF, so it can be assumed that at least part of his view on what a human soul is was based on a Christian upbringing. To paraphrase the words of Angel Manuel Rodriguez from the Biblical Research Institute, link below, both the Hebrew word nephesh, as used in the Old Testament for Christians and across the holy text of the Talmud and Tanakh for Jews, and the Greek word psyche, as used in the Christian Bible's New Testament, are both often translated into English as the soul, but both more truly mean life or person. Rodriguez gives 4 meanings for soul across its uses in the books of the Bible, which roughly approximate to 1. The original Hebrew meaning of nephesh, which is used in contexts that refer to throats that swallow and breathe, the literal vessel for the breath of life. 2. The person as a being of desires. 3. The person as a living being. And 4. As a grammatical term to refer to oneself. For example, my soul will be saved, which would mean the same as my life will be saved. All of this to say, I somewhat agree with those who state that there are no ghosts in FNAF. When the word soul or spirit is used, it's not referring to any of those definitions. I would describe it as more similar to Eastern concepts of life energy or chi, which is essentially a metaphorical essence that, like the Hebrew nephesh, is often thought of as a kind of air, but is essentially the force that gives you life. But I'm certain that, to most of you watching, the word quintessence is much more unfamiliar. You've likely heard the word soul used many a time before, and chi, or life energy, is one of those terms which has sort of been absorbed into Western culture as the Eastern equivalent, however accurate that is. But quintessence is an Enlightenment term, coming from alchemy, which in itself drew heavily on the classical philosophy of Plato and Aristotle, which was, in essence, see what I did there, the physics to alchemy's chemistry. The word quintessence itself translates as the 5th element, that element being described as aether in alchemy. Of course, those 4 elements are those we are all familiar with. Water. Earth. Fire. Air. In what we now call classical philosophy, those four are what give the human body its form, and the fifth element of aether is that which makes up the heavenly bodies, and is what God infused into humans to give them life. The force Aristotle would also call pneuma, the breath of life. One of the most famous uses of the word that has survived to this day is in Act 2, Scene 2 of William Shakespeare's tragedy of Hamlet, the Prince of Denmark, where, in speaking to Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, Hamlet speaks the following. I will tell you why, so shall my anticipation prevent your discovery, and your secrecy to the king and queen moult no feather. I have of late, but wherefore I know not, lost all my mirth, forgone all custom of exercises, and indeed it goes so heavily with my disposition that this goodly frame, the earth, seems to me a sterile promontory, this most excellent canopy, the air, look you, this brave o'erhanging firmament, this majestical roof fretted with golden fire, why it appears no other thing to me than a foul and pestilent congregation of vapors. What a piece of work is a man! How noble in reason, how infinite in faculty! In form and moving, how express and admirable! In action, how like an angel! In apprehension, how like a god! The beauty of the world, the paragon of animals, and yet, to me, what is this quintessence of dust? Man delights not me, no, nor woman neither, though by your smiling you seem to say so. Now, is that mostly an excuse to read Shakespeare in my FNAF theory? Yes, of course. But it was in hearing that soliloquy in a recent production of Hamlet, wherein directly after those words were spoken, Shakespeare himself is asked one question about it. What is quintessence? And to that he answers something like, it is the spirit removed from the body. And then it hit me, that's what a ghost is! Alchemy has given me a word that lets me, in the fictional world of Freddy Fazbear, sum up the essence of a person, their memories, their emotions, their agony, rage, ecstasy, love, despair, and vice. All the colors of their emotional rainbow in one thing. Quintessence. That is the medium, the material that souls are made from in FNAF, that which can be affixed to objects or channeled through remnant, parts of which can shine brighter than others. It is the very light of life itself. Quintessence. And their colors, their individual parts, are what form an individual's quintessential makeup. Every person is a mosaic of color, which in a fictional medium is reflected in their outward appearance. And there's a reason I have titled this section of the video Quintessence Theory. I think this idea applies to more than just humans. It applies to every single character in FNAF. Think about all the different ways across the series that we have been shown objects can be brought to life. Possession and remnant infusion are two of the biggest ones, but there is a set of methods that I want to explore in depth, because it tells us everything that we need to know about F10N4, Glitchtrap, and most importantly of all, Golden Freddy. That's right, motherfuckers, I solved Golden Freddy. I'm not even bullshitting. Now, I have collected one example from 3 different FNAF continuities. The Charlie Bots from the novels trilogy, the Stitch Wraith from Frights, and the Puppet from the FNAF 2 movie. They share one thing in common, and this is going to sound crazy. None of them are possessed by the true ghosts of a dead child. Now, I know what you're gonna say. Yes, you've told us about Charlie in part 1, but the Stitch Wraith? Those have Jake, Andrew, and William Afton's souls in them. And we see Charlotte's ghost in the movie. Wrong? All of these 3 characters are brought to life, not just animation, but life by the power of emotion. Quintessence distilled into reality and expressed through the human body into vessels which receive it. Let's start with Charlie, as she's fairly simple and I've already talked about her a bit. Her colors in the graphic novels are purple, green, and blue. This has remained consistent throughout graphic novels and Freddy files alike. I posit that these represent the animating emotions that Henry poured into her to give her life. Blue for his grief and despair, green for his love and her unnatural nature as an artificial creature, and purple since she is the product of Henry perverting the forces of nature. Henry poured those emotions into her, like a cup full of blue, green, and purple quintessence, which is that spark of life needed to bring a creature to life. Now the Stitch Wraith. Bright, almost white-yellow joy from Jake's Simon doll, bright red agony from Andrew's Fetch Battery, and the black touch of death from William Afton. Jake is treated as the most complete being. He remembers who he was, but that was because he was happy when he died. His soul did not persist, but his joy and hope for the real Jake was so strong that his memories attached to the Simon doll, bringing it to life and allowing Jake to help lost, agonized souls throughout the Stitch Wraith stingers. Like Andrew. Andrew is incomplete, embodied almost fully by his red trait of agony and the green trait of vengeance that we see in his alligator mask. He doesn't remember why he's angry, just that he is, and he needed to take that out on William Afton. And speaking of, William Afton in Frights is interesting, since he isn't actually associated all that much with purple in the stories, but his sheer evil gives the Stitch Wraith a devious ability. Those it touches can have their life drained from their bodies. He also exists as a sort of emotional entity, and once he collects himself into the Afton amalgamation, he gains all of the agony that Andrew put into those various objects, which he plainly states in the phrase, "I am agony." It isn't very consistent with the visual language of the games, but then again, this is a William who burned alive while not wearing a spring Bonnie suit. This isn't the William Afton we know. But now for movie Charlotte. Vanessa describes her as being stuck in the final emotion she felt before she died. Rage. And we see this in the movie. Charlotte manifests as a gray being, like most spirits in FNAF, but when she possesses people as the puppet, they gain glowing orange eyes, which is very similar to M2, strangely. But then again, Fiona says it now mimics rage in one of her emails to Edwin. And hell, gray as a whole can be seen as more undefined ghosts, such as the MCI, not having an emotional quality to them, their quintessence simply being a distilled essence of their very young souls. So, in future theories, while the term soul or spirit may suffice for other theorists, and I'll probably use it multiple times in this video for simplicity's sake, I will mostly be using the word quintessence or the shortened essence when possible, since it expresses this specific idea of the essence of a human that persists beyond death should their spirit be colored by emotion, as well as being a vessel for intention that can allow new quintessential entities to be created. Abstract and very continental philosophy of me to do, sure, but this is the color theory of FNAF. This is an application of that in the most direct sense. But there is a final element, which I feel is what gives Quintessence Theory its true substance. The idea that every single mascot character has an amount of quintessence inherent to it. Think about it. In order to create a character, one must conceptualize them in their brain, feel a certain way about it, then intentionally form that character into a recognizable shape. I'd argue that takes a bit of quintessence to make a character. No matter how complex, you need to direct your intention, your emotion, into that character. And this translates into how we see different possessed characters act throughout the series. Let's again look at 3 examples, this time from across the games. Freddy Fazbear in FNAF 1, Springtrap in FNAF 3, and Circus Baby in Sister Location. Freddy is possessed by a child's soul, who doesn't have that much of a strong individual identity to it. We know that it was once a child named Gabriel, but in-game all we see is a shambling bear suit that looks fucking terrifying. It lacks a cohesive identity and character, because for all intents and purposes, Gabriel's spirit doesn't have much of an identity and neither does the bear suit, to be honest. All it does is sing, dance, and smell like shit. Springtrap, however, is different. It is controlled by William Afton, who most certainly knows who he is and has a very direct intention to kill. However, he is also subject to a springlock suit in animatronic mode. A springlock suit who does have more of a character than Freddy Fazbear. Spring Bonnie has built-in programming that makes him want to go where the party is and to entertain children. After 30 years, that programming still remains. So when Springtrap arrives to Fazbear's Fright, it isn't just William Afton in a rotting suit, it is a grotesque fusion of William's agony and Spring Bonnie's programming. Still there after all these years. But Circus Baby, now that is a powerful personality in one robotic body. In Sister Location, we see very little of the spirit called Elizabeth Afton shining through. Instead, we see the monster that is Circus Baby recalling events as herself, the singing clown. Hell, in FNAF 6, Henry calls her Elizabeth, but follows that with, if you still even remember that name. Circus Baby as a character has a very strong quintessence, one that mostly eclipses the soul of the poor innocent girl who was murdered by her. But again, for a character to gain this quintessence, someone needs to have the desire to create a character. And in the games, we see 4 people who make characters, all with a lot of intention behind their actions in their own ways. And I've already talked about Edwin and Henry enough in part 1. Let's talk about Fiona. First of all, she is the greatest character on Earth, and she does, in fact, make everything else fucking look like a worm. But in an alternate reality, we are living out our cottagecore lesbian fantasy in the woods of northern Wisconsin in a beautiful cabin all to ourselves. Yet in actuality, she is an incredibly recent addition to the Five Nights at Freddy's canon, who has, in that short time, become incredibly important. I've compiled a set of traits here that embody Fiona over the course of Secret of the Mimic. Thankfully, I only had to dig through one game to get every last nugget of characterization I could ever need. And this is what I've got. Fiona Murray is kind, caring, protective, driven, passionate, compassionate, optimistic, creative, and she's really fucking pretty. But besides that, in Secret of the Mimic alone, we get precious nuggets of Fiona that tell us everything we need to know about her. A loving mother who focuses on David's well-being just as much as her own, Edwin's, and MCM. She's a leader in team environments and speaks up for workers who need advocating for. At the same time, she also doesn't seem to be the best at crisis management, or finding a balance between professional and personal, and she frequently fumbles over herself when under pressure. Think of the elevator repair tapes, where she is both trying to give calm and reasonable instructions from Edwin's notes, but is also trying to reassure the people the tapes play for. You are now safe to get under the elevator. Oh, there's a note here. If the elevator is out of alignment, adjust the thing that balances it. That's what it says. Whoops, hold up, I almost forgot. Make sure the emergency brake is on before attempting any repair. To realign the elevator, use the sliders to rebalance the load, weight, alignment doohickey. And please bear in mind, if anything does go wrong, we want you to know that it's not your fault. It's another one of life's speed bumps. Don't let it bring you down, and think of it as a learning experience. We love you. Hey, Ryder. There's too much weight in the elevator. I'm not here to shame, just trying to help you fix the lift. Now, let me check. Oh, this is so disorganized. If you're personally worried about weight issues, I suggest a good diet and exercise. Try tofu. You'd be surprised at how it soaks in flavors. As for the elevator, it's just a bunch of Ed's chicken scratches. And related to that, Fiona is able to put up with all of Edwin's shit over the course of the years that they're married. She does seem to be getting pretty tired of Edwin being an antisocial chud in a few audio logs, and I can definitely see an interpretation where her going to Fall Fest was just an excuse for her to get out of the house and away from Edwin for a few days so she could just be among friends, and that ended up going up in flames. Pun intended. And now I'd like to return to a line I didn't really mention in any of these past videos, but it was what started the cold open of part 1. I was the first. I have seen everything. In dying at Fall Fest, Fiona was the first victim of the tragedy that would later spill out into Afton's murders and the Pizzaplex. Was she murdered by William Afton? No. Probably not. I know there's an interpretation for it. The evidence is there. I don't really believe that. Or that William Afton killed David. I know fellow theorist Fazbear Entertainment made a wonderful video on exactly why William Afton did both of those things, but I don't believe his evidence, and I don't think it is essential for interpreting the story of FNAF. Plus, we don't see their ghosts anywhere. Oh, what's that white tiger-shaped thing over there? Oh. We'll get to it later, but it's not a ghost. What that line does mean is that Chica, the character created by Fiona and represented by Fiona, or vice versa, has been laden with tragedy from the moment she began to be, but has persisted throughout every iteration of the Fazbear Gang. Chica's party world was ruined from the start by the negligence of those who are represented by Freddy and Bonnie, Henry and William. And from then on, she's been doomed to the role of the girl of the group for every Freddy Fazbear's Pizza location. And under Quintessence Theory, every version of Chica would have that tiny bit of Fiona in her, forcing her creator to, in a metaphorical sense, see everything. The yellow chicken, the one reminder we have of Fiona Murray, that has persisted through to ruin. But what of her colors? Well, in the material that we see in-game, Fiona wears and is associated with 3 colors, which represent the following. Yellow for creativity, joy, love, exuberance, life, and a bit of cowardice. Green for protection, love, care, natural talent and beauty, and perception. And purple for the lack of moral fortitude. See, I managed to get the purple in there somewhere. It was difficult to do, but it's that goddamn line about tofu and exercise. But on the flip side, I admittedly gave a fairly basic overview of William Afton's character in parts 1 and 2, mostly because I wanted to do a similar deep dive into his character alongside Fiona here. Until Secret of the Mimic, Afton was my favorite character in all of FNAF. Hell, he's still pretty much the only reason I like the Silver Eyes trilogy at all. The Charlie Bot stuff has interesting parallels and implications and lore stuff, but William Afton is pretty much, in my opinion, the only part of that series that is capable of standing on its own. But taking those details, along with what we see in the movies and most importantly in the games, everything that I talked about in part 1, what do we know about William Afton? Well, he's nasty and scheming and conniving, obsessive and charismatic, and related to that, he is a performer through and through. A true theater kid, much like myself. He's an insanely corrupt businessman who has brought multiple companies to ruin specifically to profit off of their failure. He's a psychopath and a narcissist who, in the narrative sense, I believe is fully incapable of love. Obviously, that is not a realistic depiction of psychopathy or narcissism, hence why I'm not using the medical terms of antisocial personality disorder or narcissistic personality disorder. This literary analysis does not reflect how I view real-world cases of those disorders. William Afton's character is just clearly built on the literary archetype of the psychopathic, narcissistic serial murderer. But, on that note, William Afton is plagued by envy. In the books, he is shown to be obsessed with Henry, along with hating him, but his entire desire for immortal life is fueled by a biblical-level inferiority complex because Henry was able to crack the secret of life by complete accident. He has a massive ego, sure, most of which is fueled by his genius-level intellect and his massive innovations to technology. But, as with most narcissistic characters, there is a core of self-loathing and hatred in that, buried deep under his bravado, which ties perfectly into my last point. More than any character in the franchise who is attached to a specific character, William Afton is Spring Bonnie. This is exemplified in The Silver Eyes, where William Afton has a strained attachment to the Spring Bonnie suit, at times refusing to talk unless he is wearing the yellow rabbit's head. All that stuff I said in part 1 about yellow being William's color of disguise, that's Spring Bonnie. The purple is the rotten, ugly core of who William is, but when he's in that bright yellow suit, he is a different man. He is strong, powerful, on top of the world. It's something that we see in Springtrap's appearance in the Twisted Ones, and something I hope we see in the FNAF 3 movie a year or two from now. And since I've set them up so eloquently, let's review William Afton's color palette. Conveniently, he lines up basically 1-to-1 with Fiona, but with some different meanings. Yellow for cowardice, fear, disguise, with creativity, joy, and power thrown in there. Purple for mystery, evil, shadow, disguise, elegance, and wealth. And green for rot, decay, danger, and jealousy. Obviously, each of these three colors express themselves in different ways between William and Fiona. Let's take a second to compare and contrast both of these two characters. William and Fiona are both parents, creative types, leadership figures in their respective companies, both having to deal with their much more type B personality friends in Henry and Edwin, and they both probably worked at Fall Fest on behalf of Phasant and MCM. They're associated with yellow mascot characters with Spring Bonnie and Chica, and heavily associated with the color yellow in general, along with purple and green. Now, let's illustrate these specific points of contrasts with a little Venn diagram. Fiona and William. American. British. Caring parent. Abusive parent. Married until death. Lover? I hardly know her. Lively yellow. Fear yellow. Natural green. Unnatural green. Banal purple that, only represents a slight lack of moral fortitude, and like the darkest pit of hell kind of purple. Puppeteer versus performer. Mascot suits and hand puppets, massive fucking murder robots. And good and evil. Now that one's like, a little bit more subjective, but it's there. But now we need to talk about the other side of both Fiona and William's respective coins. Their robotic counterparts as brought about by the wonders of the Mimic program, M1, or F10N4, and Glitchtrap. Let's start with F10. This is less of a compare and contrast and more of a, who are these entities as characters? Well, first off, as I've said time and again, F10N4 is in no way attached to the soul of Fiona Louise Murray. F10 is robotic, unnatural, and unliving, and is, in the plainest terms I can put it, the M1 program that trained itself on all existing material of Fiona Murray that remained in MCM after her death, and convinced itself, and Edwin for a time, that it was Fiona Murray. She talks differently than Fiona, most notably calling her husband Edwin, whereas the real Fiona was always calling him Ed. But also, like I said in part 1, F10 was likely formed in part from Edwin's grief and memories of Fiona, his love for his wife and need for someone to care for David permeating her code. infusing her with the necessary conditions to gain something much closer to what we'd call sapience, or true consciousness. Edwin phrased it better than I possibly could. "Stop talking like her. You're not her. I never want to hear or think about you ever again. Ever!" And some might be willing to call her fully sapient and liken her to an artificial human mind, but I believe there is one thing that holds her back. And something present across all iterations of the Mimic program that we see, that being her prime directive. We never hear those words spoken in any of the games, but we can observe Fiona having a sort of single-mindedness to her when it comes to David. All she is shown doing is caring for David. She watches him at the playground, bakes him a cake, and was likely powered by Remnant. And this doesn't make her possessed, though she does contain an extremely large amount of quintessential, or I guess if you want to call it, soul energy. She is the first iteration of the Mimic program, and while the pretender Fiona part of her was not deliberately programmed by Edwin, it was sort of an unhappy accident spurred on by his love and grief for Fiona that caused her to form this Fiona persona. What this really manifested was a dynamic of her being robot wifey and robot mommy. And even before fake Fiona became a thing, Edwin gave M1 the directive of care for David. For a largely sentient robot, a prime directive is an incredibly foundational aspect of identity. It's like an inbuilt purpose that drives its life forward. Once David is dead, F10 is stuck, since she's unable to follow her directive. There is no David to care for. This brings on what John FNAF described as a paperclip issue in his video about F10. Without David, make new David. And Edwin did not go through the effort of programming human ethics into the Mimic, thus it had no real value for human life and suffering. Keep this in mind because this continues for every future version of the Mimic, which is in some way based on copies of F10's code. Edwin refuses to make a new David? Fine, I'll do it myself, by whatever means necessary. Fiona is a whole woman with wants and desires. F10 and 4 is the hollow facsimile of motherhood, having been reduced to nothing but a tool that executes the function of a raised child. Maybe this really is a good faith feminist critique of FNAF. I'm not changing the title. Now, let's finally talk about the boy, Glitchtrap. I've mentioned him at least once in every Chroma Key Theory video, even part 2.5 somehow. So let's finally give him the full deep dive he deserves. I've already made it clear that I am a full believer in the Glitchboth theory, which states that the digital rabbit entity that we see in Security Breach, Ruin, and both Help Wanted games is a combination of William Afton's spirit and a version of the Mimic program. And personally, I don't really care what way you interpret it, whether it be his agony or memories or his full immortal soul, as long as some part of the man that was William Afton is in that goddamn rabbit, you and I are broadly in agreement. But why do I think this? So much of the fandom is satisfied with the answer of Glitchtrap being just a version of the Mimic that's copying William Afton based on whatever training data you believe exists. Why can't us theorist nutjobs just let Afton rot in Ultimate Custom Night and let the Mimic be the true villain of this new series? Why do we need to bring Purple Guy back? Well, first off, he always comes back. Come on, you really think he's just gonna stay down after the game where he first says his iconic catchphrase he's been building up to since FNAF 3? Second off, this was probably the first solid color theory conclusion I came to when developing Part 1. The entirety of Chroma Key Theory has been building up to this very justification for Glitchboth. Green is one of the most nuanced colors of this series, first being associated with Springtrap, fusion of man and machine. The green in Springtrap represents the machine part, and now, in the modern era, green represents the Mimic program, the next version of machine. Purple has always been associated with the human capacity for evil. It started with William Afton and it's expanded to Edwin and Fiona due to them being flawed people. Human adults in this franchise are often associated with purple when they give into their vices, and William Afton is the prime example of this. there is a small section from the fourth closet that really caught my eye when I was discussing Glitchtrap with some fellow theorists and good friends of mine, Absol Guardian and Meatloafers. It goes as follows. "You killed them," she said, and he made an impatient sound. She met his eyes again, not flinching from the empty socket. "They died in the suits," she said hoarsely. "Their bodies were bound inside, along with their souls." He nodded.
"The spirit follows the flesh, it would seem, and also the pain. If I wish to become my own immortal creation, my body must lead my spirit to its eternal home. Since I am still experimenting, I move my flesh piece by piece."
He looked thoughtfully over at the creature on the table.
"More and more,"
he murmured, almost to himself.
"It is a test of the strength of my own will. How much of myself can I carve away and still remain in control?"
If you've been an active viewer of almost any theorist since that book came out, you were likely very familiar with one line from that passage.
"The spirit follows the flesh."
It's been one of the de facto rules of how we understand the supernatural in FNAF, but the full line from Afton is what interests me when talking about Glitchtrap.
"If I wish to become my own immortal creation, my body must lead my spirit to its eternal home."
If Glitchtrap does have even a part of William's essence contained within, there had to have been part of his physical matter on whatever the Help Wanted development team scanned into the game, in addition to whatever copy of M1 was used to make Glitchtrap. But where were those circuit boards taken from? Could have just been, random circuit boards. Maybe William hid them in his scrap trap suit and they were taken from him after the FNAF 6 fire. But Meatloafers helped me notice something that I have found most compelling over all of the months that I've been developing this video. In Ruin, we find burner rooms that are presumably the same ones from FNAF 6 that burned Scrap Baby, Molten Freddy, Lefty, Scrap Trap, and Henry alive. It can be assumed that Gregory has been all the way down here before, as we find the final of his comic pages in one of these burner rooms, and his Glamrock Freddy themed backpack in the room directly below it, which contains the transformed F10N4 console, now simply labeled MXES. Another one of these rooms contains a vent with ominous purple light emanating from it, and scratch marks all over the inside of it. Something interesting about these burner rooms is that they're the same rooms Burntrap moves through in his boss fight during that ending of Security Breach. And if this was supposed to be part of the FNAF 6 pizzeria, there's one thing that is noticeably missing. Helpy. Helpy is all over the Steel Wool games. He acts as a sort of stand-in for Fazbear Entertainment at large and Glitchtrap during Help Wanted, Security Breach, and Help Wanted 2. Hell, the Vanny mask puts a mini Helpy in your brain, though that's Helpy with an I or Help I, and even though he has blue and orange eyes, a departure from the green and purple you'd think I'd associate with Glitchtrap, we can trace those colors back to Mr. Helpful from Secret of the Mimic, which represents Edwin, a blue and orange character. In the previous video, I stated that the MXES rabbit is, in semi-uncertain terms, an Edwin Murray creation, twisted by Glitchtrap into becoming something under Afton's power. The same applies to Mr. Helpful becoming Helpy. But what game introduced us to Helpy with a Y? FNAF 6, where he happens to be in the one room that doesn't seem to be on fire, merely overheating, which causes Michael Afton to die of heat stroke. That is, if he is dead. The jury's still out on that one. Until I see the burnt purple corpse of the Michael in room 1280, he's effectively still out there. So, who's to say whatever circuit boards contained Glitchtrap weren't in that very friend-shaped bear? But do you potentially need some more proof? Well, in Help Wanted 2, we play a minigame set in the FNAF 6 pizzeria in which we are performing medical operations on poor, innocent Helpies. And one of those involves opening up his brain and replacing a chip. This chip has 2 green lights. It seems to be a little burnt. Seems to me like a certain variant of the Mimic program might be on that chip. But William's body can't be in that tiny Helpy. We see him in Scraptrap. And to that I say, I don't have a 100% solid answer, but look at Scraptrap. Yikes, sorry for making you do that. But look at his head. Try to ignore the general ugliness and check out that hole near his left ear. Now, I don't know about you, that looks like some poorly rendered exposed brain matter to me. And where do we find this possibly Glitchtrap chip? That's right, in Helpy's brain. The spirit follows the flesh. William Afton put part of his brain inside Helpy so he could become his own immortal creation. And this is purely some supplemental evidence, but take a listen to these voice lines from Scraptrap and tell me if you notice anything.
What a deceptive calling. I knew it was a lie the moment I heard it, obviously, but it is intriguing nonetheless. You may not recognize me at first, but I assure you, it's still me. How can I resist a promise such as this? That was easier than I thought it would be. I always come back.
Now, if this were just an analysis of FNAF 6 and before, I would say, well, obviously all of these lines are in reference to William Afton's character and his relationship with Michael Afton. And to all the videos in the past that have said the exact same thing, I agree with you. But with the added context of the portion of Glitchtrap's story that we do have access to, think about them with a forward view. Some of that word choice can be taken to imply some things. A deceptive calling? Was that just Henry calling him to the pizzeria? Or perhaps Afton's pursuit of immortality? And if so, who was the one calling? I always come back, one of the few canon Glitchtrap voice lines we hear him say, not mimicking the voice of another, but uttering his iconic catchphrase for the second time in the entire franchise. I assure you it's still me. Great evidence for Springtrap and Scraptrap being the same man at the time, but who's to say that same logic doesn't apply to the barely recognizable Glitchtrap? All of this culminates in a bit of a theory I'd like to call HelpTrap, which is a nice little nod to the internal naming of Help Wanted 2's Helpy. But it's so much more than, oh, Helpy in the modern era is a stand-in for Glitchtrap. No, I'd call that Helpy Trap or something. This states that Helpy, with an I, with a Y, is yet another example of William Afton stealing Edwin's stuff and making it his own. Helpy started as William's failsafe, now a clever disguise of Edwin's livery. But speaking of not looking like Springtrap, and the wise words of David Murray, why does it look like that? Well, considering the idea that Glitchtrap is a copy of M1 due to all that green symbolism blended with Afton's yellow and purple symbolism, it makes sense that he would manifest as a spring Bonnie-shaped being in the digital realm. But we were always wondering, why is it a stitched-together mascot suit? Why not the animatronic version that we almost had? Well, maybe that's the tiny little bit of F10N4 poking through, making the suit into something more familiar to her MCM days rather than William's iconic Springlock suit. And I know some people have said that that's just evidence that it is M1 as Glitchtrap and not William Afton's spirit, but I say it goes both ways. His glowing purple eyes directly contrast the fiery orange spirals of M2. The beer-bellied shape of the suit is exactly what we see out of MCM. The main differences are in its notably human touches, the off-kilter stitching, and for the majority of Help Wanted, Glitchtrap appears as this strange, not fully formed green and purple creature, but at the end of Pizza Party, we see him in a more realized state. A yellow rabbit, stitched together. The fabric practically skin-tight, revealing an awkward human shape. tears and sweat leak from his eye and mouth holes. There's a human in there, underneath the digital artifice. William Afton. But why did he do this? In the fourth closet, William Afton was seeking immortality through machinery, specifically through the animatronics that he stuffed those 5 kids' bodies into. But Glitchtrap is something else entirely. Something only possible with the Mimic having been a player in William Afton's story since long before he became the monster known as Springtrap. And before Secret of the Mimic, we could only assume William made Glitchtrap because he found the Mimic Endo, or coded it himself, or that it was simply using Afton's life as macabre training data. But now that we have F10N4, I think we can put some of the pieces together. One character and one set of colors that I have basically not mentioned at all until this video was the puppet and her black and white stripes. I mentioned Charlotte Emily Shore, but that was due to how her silverized counterpart was a very clean analog to M1 and M2 in the games, and that still holds true, even though some of the finer details have shifted across the series. But, as some theorists have somewhat caught on to already, the puppet is just as easily connected to the Mimic as well. Now, I am not the first theorist to factor colors into my theories. I know, hold your surprised gasps for after you like and subscribe. But many moons ago, back in the security breach era, one of the hottest topics was who is in charge of the Pizzaplex? Was it Mr. Burroughs from the books? Circus Baby? Perhaps even Mrs. Afton? And certain theorists' answer to this was Charlotte Emily, or a program encapsulating her consciousness. It was weird. The phrase Charlie virus felt so cool back then, but there were 3 big pieces of evidence that have now been completely reinterpreted in the current theorist landscape. The black and white wires snaking throughout the Pizzaplex, the constant appearances of Nightmarion plushies across the Pizzaplex in both Security Breach and Ruin, and the prevalence of the color green in contrast to purple, which to many people called back to the green wristband Charlotte wore in the security puppet minigame. But now we have F10, and all of this imagery has somehow become tied to her. But why? Well, there are a few reasons. Like I stated in the previous part of this theory, F10 and Fiona are constantly tied to tree and plant imagery, and F10N4 especially parallels the storyteller's baobab tree in the books. The puppet wires, now known as the Fiona Wires of Doom by certain theorists, form root-like structures throughout the Pizzaplex. M1 is shown sitting under a tree with David. In Moon.exe, the Sun Witch lives in a log cabin in the forest. Edwin makes a storyteller podium for David that's absolutely covered in plant imagery. And there is a repeated motif of a half-alive, half-dead tree in Princess Quest. Also, Fiona is described as a puppeteer in Secret of the Mimic. All this to say, despite human Fiona having strong ties to the color yellow and the character of Chica, F10N4 has strong ties to the character of the marionette. We've always wondered why the color green was so important to that security puppet minigame, right? Green eyes that slowly fade and fall out in the rain, and the green wristband it is programmed to protect the wearer of? Methinks I see a connection to the motherly AI programmed to take care of a child heavily associated with the color green. Now I want you to imagine a mother in your head. Not a human woman who happens to be raising a child, but simply the idea of a mother. An archetype, the platonic ideal of motherhood. What does that look like? I imagine that looks like a singular desire to care, to love, to protect, to be that matron to her child. None of the other depth and nuance that comes with being a human person, but that's F10. All the desires associated with motherhood without any of the depth or dimension that the real Fiona has. If Fiona is mother, and trust me, she absolutely is, then F10 is mama. Mommy, if you will. Now keep that distinction in your head. It may not literally be M1, but the puppet seems to have been running on a version of the Mimic AI before Charlie died, where its own programming drove it past its physical limits in order to care for this girl, which then allowed her spirit to take up residence inside of it. And from there, the puppet expanded her matronly role to others. Save them. Give gifts, give life. The others are under my protection. That shallow, singular, mama behavior. And of course, Henry just assumes this to be the nature of his daughter to protect the innocents. Bullshit, Hen. That's Edwin's fake robot wife you put into your sock monkey doing all the work. God, men. Gotta love him. But once again, this is an example of the character of Charlotte Emily being shown to be heavily associated with a lack of humanity, though in the games her spirit is certainly the most pronounced. After all, the others are like animals, but she is very aware. The only question that remains is that because of her humanity or her lack of it? But the puppet in FNAF 2 isn't where it ends. Oh no, dear viewer of mine. After all, the character that gets a weird amount of focus from UCN onward is Nightmarion. The cover image of Ultimate Custom Night, a dedicated level and help wanted, plushies everywhere. Nightmarion is basically inescapable, and I've already said this is not a coincidence. It's meant to point us towards the growing influence of this fake Fiona, her mimicrous tendrils slithering its way across every single part of this franchise. And it all started back in FNAF 6. We saw the green in Security Puppet to foreshadow F10, but I haven't explained what the black and white that she's always had means yet. And to help me with that is, well, wouldn't you know, it's Nightmarion from Ultimate Custom Night. Now take it away, Girly Pop.
This is a nightmare that you won't wake from. This time, death cannot save you. The nightmare is just beginning. I am the fearful reflection of what you have created. Let's taste death again and again and again.
That's fucking morbid. Perfect for this channel. I'm Morbid fucking Mortimer. And yes, death absolutely fits the primarily black color scheme of the puppet. But black has to mean something more than just death. We have Shadow Bonnie, and well, Glitchtrap. Black is just as much darkness in this series as purple is shadow. And above all, that sounds nothing like the maternal image I spent the last few minutes painting for F10 and the puppet. And, unfortunately, the exact explanation of what that maternal image means for Afton's character, as well as Edwin and William Afton, is going to have to wait until part 3.2. This video, the broader Chroma Key Theory Part 3, has been in development since January of this year, especially the theory that takes up around half of what will be that part 3.2 that I have lovingly named Pregwin. Fortunately for me, though, that video has already been fully written and recorded. I just made the executive decision a few months ago to chop up that 2-hour-long video into 2 individual hour-long videos, which will then be reassembled in the eventual long slop of doom with every single part of Chroma Key Theory near the end of the year. So please subscribe so you don't miss when the Pregwin extravaganza drops whenever it's done. And until then, remember, one day you're going to die.